You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, episode number 29. Today I speak with Kirsten Robinson on adoption. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their touching stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today we will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hey, Kirsten, how are you today?
I'm good, Christina. I'm happy to see you again and, do this thing. Spending time with you is always a pleasure. So
it's like for you just to tell everybody who you are and a little bit, you can throw something fun in there. What do you like? Something cool. So who are you?
So much pressure, Christina. So much pressure to be fun. No. So my name's Kirsten, and currently in my work life, I'm a social worker for a foster care and adoption agency, so an FFA. I always just, kind of like to share how I got into that role. So I've been there about 3 years now, and it was interesting because I was in the last month of my internship at a children's hospital, and I felt, I have to get a job. This is what I need to do. So I was just kind of aimlessly putting out applications, places here, there, everywhere. And nothing was happening. There was no movement. And I remember listening to this sermon, and essentially the sermon touched upon, when was the last time that you've sort of checked in with God and asked him, hey, what's your plan for me? Not just, being focused on the things that I want. And so I took a minute and I sort of asked him that and processed that and tried to get my heart in the right place. And that same day, I had got the interview offer for my current job. So I don't think that, I'm there by any mistake. And so I've been there for about 3 years now, and I absolutely love it and plan to be there for quite some time. So this is definitely a topic I'm excited to kind of just share with everyone listening today.
Yeah, definitely. Don't you love when things come together like that? It's just so, evident that God has his hand in things. And yes, so we are going to talk about adoption. So adoption is a joyful thing. People who are unable to welcome a child into the world, are unable to welcome a child into the world, have an opportunity to bring somebody into their family and take care of them. But there are some other things involved in adoption that might not be so great. So today we're going to hopefully talk about all the good, but also some of the ugly and how you can move forward through that and just experience that joy in adoption.
Definitely. So, it's funny you touch upon that, because when I came into this job, I had no idea about all the ways that grief and loss are just sort of patchworked into this whole experience, whether that be for the adoptee, the adoptive family, for the birth family. I think on the surface, we think, yeah, it's this great thing. I'm doing a great thing. And maybe we have an idea of some of the sadder parts to it, but it is really so intricate. So I'm really glad that you touched upon that. In my role, so I do write home studies, which I have, shared with you in previous conversations, and I also case carry. So when kids are in our care, I go to the homes, I'm checking on them, we're coming up with treatment plans and that sort of thing. But prior to being approved, we do trainings with the families who are going through the process. And so we do talk a lot about grief and loss and all of the ways that just affects everybody in what is called the constellation. So like I said, the adoptee, the birth families, and the adoptive family. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Right. And the home study is a key component to all of this, where, if maybe you have gone through adoption or you haven't and you don't really know, it's not as simple as, hey, I want a baby and I'm going to go adopt. you know. You have to have a lot of paperwork that you go through, and then you have to have this thing called a home study, and I'm going to let you tell everybody a little bit about what that is. But that home study has a power in of itself, and it can create some of those emotions that we're talking about. Can you explain to the audience what that entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you mentioned, Christina, there is a ton of paperwork involved. And so, once you sort of get through that piece of it, you are assigned a home study writer. So, that's where I would come in. And I do a series of interviews with the applicants, and I essentially write a 20-page paper about their life. And so, there are lighter topics just about your hobbies, your interests, your lifestyle. So, a social worker would look at that and say, oh, this kiddo would be a great fit for your family. They're really active, or maybe we need a family who's a little more low key, whatever that is. But big things can tend to come up. So during the second interview I do with families, that's where we really hit, into past traumas and experiences that they've had. And I always let people know this is never to judge you, and it shouldn't be. And if any social worker makes it that way, or if you've had that experience, I truly apologize for that, because that is by no means what it should be. Essentially, I always tell people we want people who have been through stuff. If, you say, oh no, nothing's ever hard, anything's never happened to me, that's probably not the truth. But the reason we want to know is because we want to know how you've coped with things and how you're going to help the kiddos that come into your care. So I can primarily speak for, people going through the foster care to adoption experience, but whether you're adopting through foster care, private adoption, international, there are going to be things, to unpack. And so with that, with the home studies, we just want to know, what have you been through? How have you coped with things? And how will you support our kids in care? That's really the biggest piece of it, and why we're asking the questions that we're asking. So with that, sometimes things come up, and maybe we make certain recommendations for, having a few counseling sessions maybe before, you move forward with the process. And so oftentimes maybe it's, anger issues that have come up. Infertility could be one of them. That's always a big one too. So there could be just a variety of things that come up that we just want to make sure our applicants have really processed before we're bringing in a kiddo with trauma into your care. So that's essentially the biggest point of the home study.
I'm glad that you bring that up when you say that you may suggest having a few counseling sessions prior. So if somebody hears that and they're going through this process, they have painted this amazing picture. You get to do I guess like a scrapbook essentially, and put together photographs. I don't know how you do it, and I know sometimes they do that, and you get to talk about all these great things, and they're excited, and then all of a sudden you get this answer that you have to go through some counseling sessions. Is that not to be taken as a no? It's just maybe we need a few more steps. So I'm wondering if that person would be like, hey, maybe this means that I'm not good enough to have a kid, or something like that. How do you combat that?
Right. So instead of trying to, get to that point, we always just try to be very open and upfront from the very beginning that, this may be something that's asked of you, a requirement. It's not personal. You know what I mean? So that people just already have that seed kind of planted. And in my experience, it's been very rare that that's actually happened. The biggest time it happens is maybe, if the infertility that they've experienced is super recent. So maybe within the last month or so. And we're like, hey, let's just kind of talk about, what does your support system look like? How are you processing this, and those sorts of things? Because, you can also bring children into your home and maybe still be working on building a family in other ways. And that's totally fine. But should something happen, while you have other kids in your care, it can become, just very heavy, so we just really want to know, what supports do you have in place? And I'd also recommend, just to anybody listening out there, I would say get plugged into something now. If this is something that's been on your heart and on your mind, there are plenty of maybe people in your community that have this experience. You know, lots of people from your church may have experience with foster care or adoption that can be good, trusting sounding boards for you. There's tons of community support groups, which maybe might not be happening right now in person, but there's tons of virtual support groups as well. So you could really just kind of start, you know, hashing out some of those questions and thoughts and feelings, so that when you go into this process, you know, you have a good idea of what's to come.
Absolutely. So, what other things? Right now, we're just going to focus on the grief aspect, and then we'll move into the joy
Sure.
piece. But what kind of other things do you find come up during the process that could possibly, bring on some grief? Maybe
Yeah,
that's not being accepted into the program. I mean, but is a no always a no? That kind of thing. What would you?
right. So most of the time, and I can only really speak for foster care in our agency, but if you're at the point to where you're being assigned a home study writer, I can tell you I've been doing this for 3 years. I've written probably at least 100 home studies, and I've never had to deny anybody. Okay. So denials aren't something that, you know, we just look to do, right? So if you've made it to the point of a home study, more than likely you're going to be approved. And so again, I'd rather you just be upfront and honest about experiences. And just a reminder, it's not there to judge you or to reject you by any means. I want people who have been through stuff. 100%, 100%. That's what, you know, we want. And so we're just there to talk about it. This was the experience, and this is how you handled it. That is literally it. Um, but just so when we're talking about grief and maybe certain things to process, I would also recommend going to therapy before you do this. And this is the reason why. I think there will be tons of unexpected things that are going to cause grief that we don't even think about. For instance, maybe you adopt and that kiddo has their first birthday party, and there could be thoughts and feelings of, well, what would my child's first birthday party have been like, right? So just with like any type of loss, whether it's a spouse, a parent, whatever, there are things that come up that we have no idea that are going to trigger us. And so just talking with a therapist about, well, I wonder what some of those things would be and how will I react, you know, when those things come up. And if you're married, you do not have to be married. You can be single, and become a resource parent as well. So for any single people listening, please do not let your relationship status hold you back by any means. You know, it's been great the last few years that I've been there just to see more and more single applicants coming forward. And you know, there's this idea of, well, I thought I couldn't do it because, you know, it's just me. What about it's just you? You still have love. You still have resources. You still, you know what I mean? There's tons that you can offer and bring to the table. So please do not let your relationship status hinder you. So there's a single applicant listening and this is on your heart. Do it. Here's your sign. You know, go find an agency that you feel comfortable with. You know, there's tons of different ways to do this. But if you are married, really processing, you know, this can't just be some sort of plan B, right? You know, adoption is a beautiful, beautiful way to form a family. However, you know, going into it with the right heart is really important. And, you know, sometimes maybe one partner's a little more motivated and excited than the other. So do those check-ins with each other and make sure that it is a mutual decision, because if you're not on the same page and let's say you do get approved, not only is that going to hurt your relationship, but that's going to hinder the child in your home. You know, they have those feelings. They can pick up on those things if something's not right. So really just doing lots of check-ins with your partner along the way and honoring those feelings. And I think that's something that's definitely important to process in therapy as well. Definitely important.
Those are all good points. I love the fact that you bring up that things are going to come up that may be triggers that you didn't anticipate, because that is very true to grief. You know, you can go through and feel like you're fine, and then all of a sudden something can hit you and bring you to your knees. And so I think that's very important to understand, to expect the unexpected, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that piece of grief is also important to remember when parenting your children, because you have kids who have been removed from their birth families, and they say at every, age and stage, you can kind of expect something to come up with every developmental stage, some sort of grief, some sort of feelings, something that's going to come up for them. It could be something as simple as they're in class learning about, biology or genetics, and it's like, whoa, wait, who am I? So there are tons of things that can come up. So really just if you see a change in your child, just really checking in with them, because there are going to be triggers along the way for them as well. So if you have that in mind, when parenting, kiddos coming into care from trauma, just really keep that in mind as well. Definitely.
How long is the time, like the process generally take? Because when we have natural birth, we're pregnant for almost 9 months, and so we have a little preparation. Although I would argue that that 9 months of feeling pregnant and being pregnant and having all the things does not really prepare you
Oh,
for
no.
actually having the baby in your home, and even each year that comes afterwards, and all the things, but as far as adoption is concerned, what is that timepiece, and how does that have a hand in how all this goes on?
Sure. So it really, sort of depends. If you're doing private adoption, that can look very different, but with foster care, that can look different too. So it just depends what you're open to. And this can also be a segue. Some people only want what we call matched adoptions. And so that is where a child is essentially at the point where, let's say, parental rights are going to be terminated, but they just need to identify an adoptive family. So we'll get a referral for this kiddo. We'll call our families, see who's interested. We'll submit them. If they're chosen, then that has its own process of disclosures where they give you all the information about the kiddo and the family to see if you'd like to move forward. Then that can transition into a meet and greet, transitional visits, things like that. So depending on the county and the child situation, maybe they're in your home within a month. But then from that point, they have to be with you for at least 6 months before any type of adoption can really be considered. So they'll be with you at least 6 months. And then in the background, though, you'll have sort of the legalities going on too. So maybe they extended the parents' court date for XYZ, right? Because they're seeing how the adjustments going into your home. And then the birth parents may appeal whatever decision is made. So then that sort of takes on its own process too. So you could be looking maybe in that situation with a matched adoption, maybe a year or so. And then let's say you take in an emergency placement. So we would call you up and say, hey, we got this referral. These kids just got removed today. This is their first time in care. They need a home. So you're like, yeah, sure, I'll take them. Maybe they go home in 3 days. Maybe they go to a relative in 3 months, or maybe they're in your home up to 18 months and eventually become reunified with parents. And so that can be a set of grief for, the adoptive parent, the foster parent, obviously coping with, those kids going back to birth parents. That always tends to be the biggest fear, I will say, in my home study writing. There are people who come into this only wanting to do foster care, and that's great. We need that too. And then there are people who truly have their heart set on permanency and providing that permanent plan, and that tends to be their biggest fear with that, definitely. So when we talk about that, I would say, don't necessarily put limits on the way that God can stretch your heart. I've had so many people create great relationships with those birth families. And yeah, maybe they didn't get to adopt them, but they still became a permanent figure in that kiddo's life. And so not only did you get to love on a child, but now you have a birth mom and a birth dad and, all the siblings and extended family members. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful, beautiful things can come from that. I had a family recently who last year they had taken in a foster care placement. It was this emergency situation. It was a baby, and this baby ended up going to relatives. And so, it was sad. But now that family and this, foster family have such a great relationship, the birth family asked them to be godparents to this baby. And so now they will have a lifelong, connection to him. So that fear is very real, but I think that's something that you should continue to process, either in therapy or with your social worker, or, with your spouse, and see maybe, what ways can you really pray about just allowing God to stretch your heart.
Mhm. Yeah, I love the fact that you say asking God to stretch your heart, because that was the question I was going to ask, how you mitigate that stress, because I can only imagine that, that anticipatory grief of losing
Right.
the child, getting attached to the child, and then even the stress that it causes the child having to be in this place and forming attachments and relationships, or even maybe not even being willing to form an attachment, can be hard on a lot of fronts.
Right.
How do you help the child in that situation? So is it kind of the same thing? As an adult, you have to, you know, um, basically take the reins and have self-discipline, and say, hey, I am afraid, but I'm going to make sure I do whatever is best for the child. So how do you do that when you're afraid?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the biggest way that you could support a child in your care is to have a healthy relationship with their family. So by them seeing you model a healthy, trusting, loving relationship with those birth parents, that's really going to help the child, because they have an attachment with you, and they obviously have an attachment to their birth parent, regardless of, what's happened. That love, is still there. And so they can say, hey, like, this is a good, safe situation. And, if you have a good relationship with the birth family and they're willing to keep in contact with you and things like that, that can just really help the child feel secure, as I'm not necessarily losing you. I'm expanding my love story, and I'm expanding the people who care about me, and I'm expanding my cheerleading team. And so I think that's one of the most helpful things.
I love that perspective. So you may not deal with this type of an adoption. I'm guessing it may be a private adoption, but so we hear say that the adoptive parents don't know who the birth parents are. So is that with private? Is that how that works? Um,
I mean, maybe, and I know even like with private adoption, that may be the case, but that birth parent might also be willing to have a super open adoption as well. So you can still be like an intricate part in that person's life. So that birth mom might want somebody who specifically wants an open adoption. So that's something to kind of think about, how open am I to that? Definitely something to think about. And there may be, some birth moms in a private adoption who it could just be more of like a safe surrender situation. They don't necessarily, want to maybe have that piece right now, and that's okay too. But so yeah, specifically with foster care, more likely than not, you're going to have a lot of interaction with birth family. Definitely more likely than not. There may be a rare situation where you don't, but more likely than not, there will be a lot of interaction for sure.
So I was just thinking, I guess you hear sometimes that a kid will be adopted and then it will be years later and they will not, I guess they'll be introduced to their birth parents. So I was just curious, because I can only imagine that can cause some grief. I mean, it can be really exciting, and it can
Right.
also cause some grief, depending on how that
Definitely.
looks.
Yeah. So no matter, I guess what avenue you want to take when it comes to adoption, one thing that I would have you sort of start thinking about now is, how are you going to have adoption related conversations with your kids? That's going to be super important. So in the home study, one thing I'll ask is, do you plan on telling your child that they're adopted? Which absolutely just needs to be a yes. That's not anything that can be kept a secret. Just no. 10 out of 10 do not recommend. Plenty of research shows, just the negative impacts that can obviously have on a person, right? To be living one identity and to think one thing and then just be slapped in the face with another reality. So my supervisor, for instance, she adopted. And so I always kind of, give people this sort of piece of advice, when it comes to just being open right up front. So, she would be driving somewhere and she would tell her son, hey, look, this is where our love story started, right? Maybe driving past that adoption agency and things like that. Okay. So I think that's like a super good way to just have that from the get-go. If you have a picture of their birth parents, why not have that up in their room too? So it's just a conversation piece. It's known right from the beginning. If you celebrate a gotcha day, so the day that you got them, you know what I mean? So not just a birthday, but a gotcha day, can just be an extra celebration. So these are all like super good ways just to start the conversation immediately. Just have it be something from day one. This doesn't need to be like an awkward like puberty talk like 10 years later, you know what I mean, where you sit down to have the talk. Like don't do that, please. But just be super open and honest from the get-go. And I promise that that's not necessarily easy. So what I would suggest is getting in touch with an adoption competent therapist. So look in your area for somebody who specializes in that specifically, so that they can really answer those questions that you have.
Okay, I love that. I love this. We said we were going to talk about the joy as well, and you already kind of incorporated all of that as how you do that perspective change. It's just kind of a little small flip that you do from looking at it in one way to saying, hey, you know what? I get to do this. I have this love story. I'm stretching this love. I love that. That's great.
Yes.
It can be very, very heavy, I'm assuming, on all fronts, not just the adoptive parents, but the birth parents, the children. So having that perspective is stretching that love is just beautiful. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, Kirsten, I know that you have given a lot of advice. We've talked about how, you do not have to be married. You can be single and adopt. You can have struggles, and you want people to have struggles and show how
I want the struggles. Yes. Struggles are fun, please.
So do not feel like you are not worthy of adoption. So that's such a great message. So can you give some encouragement for several different things? So number one, for the adoptive parent who wants to adopt, but number two, for the child maybe who has been adopted, like maybe an older child or an adult person who has been adopted, and then three, for the adoptive parent, I think it is, that has to adopt out their children.
Oh, for the birth parent. Yeah. So for an adoptee, I just want to start with, there is so much that you can offer by sharing your story, with somebody else. Just recently, in the last couple years, I've seen so many applicants come through who have either been adopted themselves or they spent time in foster care as a child or teenager. And just that knowledge and that firsthand experience, there's no replacement for that. There's really not, So if that experience has maybe put this on your heart to want to do that as well, please, please, please do it. Please find an agency that you're comfortable with and that you think can offer you the support that you need and all those things. Shop around with agencies. Don't just necessarily look up one and be like, cool, this is the one. Call them, have a conversation with, their resource parent coordinator. And just see who you feel comfortable with. Do a little research, look up reviews. This is a big decision to make. So please shop around. Even if somebody comes to our agency, sometimes we'll say, hey, look at 2 or 3 just to make sure, we're the right fit for you, But yes, if you've been adopted and that is on your heart, please do it. We need you. Everyone needs you. Children need you. For people coming through the process, here's the biggest thing that I want to just let you know. Please do not let your preference get in the way of your purpose or service. And here's why I say that. Because in the home study process, we talk about, well, what are you open to? And so someone might tell me, well, I'm open to maybe 0 to 2, or I'm open to 0 to 6 months, and I only want this gender, and I only want this ethnicity, and that sort of thing. And that's okay. We all have preferences, okay? But that can be like anything in life. Maybe you want to be married, but don't let your preference get in the way of what God has for you. maybe you want a certain career, but don't be so, dead set on just this, like let God show you what he can do. I have had so many families who started out as, we want one kid 0 to 4, and now they have sibling sets of 4 kiddos that range from, school age kids to teenagers, and they wouldn't trade it for the world. So that's why I say that. Do not let your preference get in the way of your purpose or service. This is put on your heart for a reason, and I absolutely believe that. But let's, play around with what that reason may be. So it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically for a certain age, So that would be the biggest thing that I would want to say to people considering going through this, that's the biggest piece of advice that I can give for that. And, just for birth families as well, man, it's so hard because there is such a sense of loss. And I feel like there's always just this sense of judgment that we as a society, put on them for whatever reason. And so a lot of times when you actually get to know our birth families, they've been through such incredible hardships that we couldn't even imagine, or maybe they've been in care themselves as a child, or, just a variety of situations. And so just if there is a birth parent, listening to this, I just want to let you know that there are so many people that love you and value you and thank you, and find those safe people. And I hate that we, put that judgment on anybody, right? So just if you are somebody who just needs to feel loved, I'm giving you that love right now, sincerely. And yeah, so that's, I think those would be my three things.
Awesome. So what I'm hearing is a lot of compassion, love, and the willingness to allow God to work in the way he sees fit, right?
Absolutely.
So Kirsten, it was so great having you, and I really enjoy talking about adoption. Can you let people know how to get a hold of you, especially if they are looking to adopt?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any questions and you would just like to reach out, and I'd be happy to answer those for you, you can find me on Instagram at unofficially widowed. It is totally unadoption related, but send me a DM and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. If you are listening to this and you live in California or Nevada, the agency that I work for is Koinonia Family Services. So you can totally look them up as well as a, potential, hey, maybe I'd be interested in this FFA. But wherever you may be listening from, there's lots of great agencies in your area as well. And so just really considering, do we want more of a private adoption and looking into what that means in terms of costs and things like that? Do we want an international adoption, or do we feel good about adopting through foster care, which I would recommend, So yeah, so please feel free to reach out on Unofficially Widowed. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and just God bless you on this journey. This was put on your heart for a reason. It is an amazing way to just not only build a family, but to just help a child. It really truly is. And so there's just a million ways to go about it, but find yours. So I'm really excited, and I hope this just blesses somebody.
Wow, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story and how we can join families and expand God's love, stretch his love, I think is what you said. So for those who are listening, I ask that you continue to be blessed and bless others, and we will see you next time.
This episode of Faith Breathed Hope is sponsored by the Kingdom Women's Summit Planting Seeds. Make sure to go to www.kingdomwomen.net to get your tickets for our first conference, which is January 21st through 23rd. The conference is online, and we hope to see you there.
And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.